Okay, so this recording is taking place on Tuesday, October 19th at 9:30. So hi everyone, it's Ruth O'Donnell here from the Foot Nerd program, and I'm here with Kristina de la Cruz today. We are Foot Nerds, and we are embarking on a big adventure together. So I'm really excited, for one thing, to have another person to talk to. And secondly, we are going to create a series of conversations about the 5 pillars of health. And this is going to be called the Balancing Act, because Kristina de la Cruz, I just have to say your name all together every time because I love it.
I'm totally used to it. Ever since I was little, everybody, I mean, I love my last name as well, but other people do too. I'm even used to being called Dela Cruz. So, but the full
It's
thing together, it's pretty sweet.
it is. Kristina de la Cruz is going to be Kristina de la Cruz, and I encourage you all to call her by the same. But we're going to talk about, so we're going to jump into a topic today. So what this is going to be called the Balancing Act, and Kristina is going to explain how she came up with this really great name that I love. And then we're going to talk about, we're going to do a series of conversations about financial literacy. The reason why we're doing that is because in our Foot Nerd program, we are adding a 6th pillar, and it's going to be about financial health. And so we're going to jump in and talk about this, but we're going to do it in a way that's extraordinarily honest and transparent. And just before we started recording, we were saying, like, this is hilarious how we jumped into the hardest one. And Kristina de la Cruz was saying, it's hard because it's the one I know the least about. And for me, it's the hardest one because I have to take off this certain disguise around, like, blending into the world around me. Because we were discussing how anything regarding, like, the details of finances is really quite taboo to talk about. So we're going to jump into this conversation. But before we do that, I wanted to have Kristina explain the background of the Balancing Act, and then we'll go from there. Hi,
Okay.
Kristina de la Cruz.
Hello, Ruth O'Donnell. It's really nice to talk to everybody. And so the reason I chose the Balancing Act, originally I wanted something punny, but this one just kind of resonated with me as soon as I thought of it. First, if you know anything about Foot Nerds, we like to use a lot of balancing beams, and even just like individual balancing type of work. It's really important. It's a building block for essential movement, really. But then also, just to add on to it, like being a balancing act, it's a duo for Ruth and I going into this journey together, and then we're sharing with all of you. Um, and so it's kind of the balancing sides of both of us, both being female, but with our just different views and different backgrounds. And then just how life can be a balancing act. And even just with health, there's a lot of balancing within that. So yeah, that's kind of why the name kind of stuck for us.
Mhm.
But yeah.
All right. Yeah, it's true. And we also are from different generations. And so this is a particular passion of mine, to try to talk with as many different people in as honest of a way and tell our stories around health, and from the different generations. Like, I find that they're in my age group, in people in their 50s, we don't, I mean, I'm speaking personally, but we don't hear or listen long enough to people who are either older than us too. Like, I think our elders are getting, like, kind of tossed by the wayside, but also but we don't really listen closely to, I don't listen closely to younger people's voices, and, like, their concerns and their hopes and their dreams, and also their views about life and their perspective. And so that's a big goal of mine, to do that. So I think crossing generations is really important too. The subject that we're going to talk about, so I wanted to just start because when we were doing our research for this particular conversation around money, we I got an email from Kristina because I asked her, like, would you want to do this together? We both really liked the idea of talking um, about this, and kind of, like, unpacking the ideas about financial health and financial literacy. And we have a specific interest in, like, how women approach these subjects. But also because, oh, I forgot what I was going to say. Oh yeah, I wanted to address the ideas. We wanted to talk about, oh, she said at the subject of the email, like, I don't even know how to talk about money. And that was our launching pad for like, well, this is very important, right? For not only for people in general, but for women especially. And so we thought, well, let's explore it. So we thought we would start with our actual stories about how money has shaped us. Excuse me, how money has shaped our lives. And so we're going to start by, we want to answer some questions like, why is this conversation important? And maybe we'll do that just as we go along, as it organically comes up. Why are the specifics of money and finances and the details about numbers so taboo to talk about? You know, like anytime I really want to talk about numbers, like how much do you make? How do you divide that up? How do you live on that? There seems to be, it's very taboo. You get a feeling right away that people are very reticent or hesitant to share their lives around money, like how much credit card debt are you in, student loan debt, like, and I think it has to do with shame, at least from my perspective. And then what does financial health have to do with foot nerds and the way that we approach health, right? So like on our social media pages, people are always telling us to stay in our lane and just talk about feet and ankles, but usually people don't understand that, like, we are not just foot and ankle people. That's just a launching, like, you know, the guys always say like a foot conversation is a whole body conversation. And that's just one aspect. That's like the jumping off place where we, in the Foot Nerd program, we discuss sleep, movement, community, mindfulness, and food. And now we're starting in on financial literacy. And these are all very intertwined and married aspects of health. And so, Kristina, I just wanted to hear your thoughts about, like, why is this conversation important to you? Why do you think it's so taboo to talk about?
Well, I'm going to start with why I think it's so taboo to talk about, just because it kind of like popped in my head as you were talking. I do think shame is definitely a part of it, but I think there's also almost a competitive type nature, especially if you're talking with coworkers and you're making different pay. And sometimes, you're even discouraged by your employers to not talk about your pay with other people because of that, because it can create issues. Yeah, and I think it's kind of a shame that we translate that to not sharing it with other people outside of our work realm. It should be something that we can be able to talk about freely. Um, gosh, I'll just go ahead and dive right into it. Another question that it brought up for me, sorry, I'm trying to pull it up, is
Okay.
it's kind of like, is money a system of power? And we don't have to dive into that right now, but it is something that I have just really, even today, started really thinking about. Even just our value system. It's like, we'll get into that part later. But so I was like, because that's deep. Okay.
Yeah.
But like, this is important to me because it's part of our everyday aspect, day in and day out. Money is part of our lives, whether we like it or not at this current point. It's there, and it definitely affects our health, especially for me. I think it really affects our mental health. I don't know if that's just for me personally or for most people, and I think that's why it's so important for our country to really focus on our mental health, because financial health is so much part of that, instead of looking at so many other different aspects, or just maybe not so many other different aspects, like a micro tiny aspect that they seem to want to focus on. But yeah.
So maybe we should, from this point, we should just, I think that's a really good point, by the way, going back to what you said about not talking about money and the specifics. And I thought that tied in nicely to money as a system of power, because you brought up the idea that our employers, like, you don't, and I didn't even think about this. That's such a great insight, because I was just kind of having a flashback of like how it was in the workforce that people because people made different amounts, that we were encouraged not to share our financial statistics with other people. But I don't even remember anybody saying that to me. It's almost like we just know intuitively not to talk about that. And I mean, to me, it seems like anything that we can't openly discuss, there's probably something like kind of fucked up going on behind the scenes if we can't like talk about it. So, yeah, so I think that I didn't even think about that part of it. There's so much to talk about when it comes to money, and I think that you naturally went into money as a system of power, and I think that that is true even in the workforce. Like, we're taught from an early time when we're working not to discuss those specific numbers with people, so that is like a trickle down from our superiors, and we sort of tether ourselves to that outside of the workforce as well. And that doesn't help. We don't help each other in that way to understand money. I certainly don't have even now in my 50s, like, I think I just put my head under the rock or in the sand or whatever that saying is, where when it comes to these types of things, because everything seems to be working fine, the bills are getting paid, and I'm able to do what I want to do. But let's go ahead and go right into our stories then. And I want to start with you because what we did was we decided to start with our actual financial backgrounds in order to see where we're going, like where were we, where are we now, and then what's happening in the future with like the way that the world is evolving around money. So we thought that we would spend this particular conversation discussing our backgrounds. You want to go ahead and start?
Great. Yeah.
Okay.
So my story with money, I would describe my upbringing as a lower middle to upper middle class, and that could be a separate conversation. I don't even know how to just fully distinguish between those, but how I view it, that's how I would describe our transition with money. So it really starts with kind of my parents. My mom came from a working class family. Both her parents worked. And my mom had my sister when she was 17. So then she got her GED, and then she was working like 3 jobs pretty much till she met my dad. I think they're maybe like 21, 22 when they met. My dad came from, oh, so sorry about that.
That is her name. There it is, people. Kristina de la Cruz.
And actually I want to complete.
Where did you go?
Am I back?
You're back.
I didn't want to be interrupted anymore. I thought I'd done that. I apologize.
Okay.
Yeah. So my dad came from a wealthier family, I would say, from Puerto Rico. But they weren't always that way. Like my dad, or my abuelo, or my grandpa. He started really with nothing. He started selling coconuts out of the back of his car, and then grew to have several businesses. And then my dad kind of took that kind of mindset. He just wanted to branch out on his own. He actually left his house at 15 so he could go to Valley Forge. He knew exactly what he wanted to do. So like the plan was to go to the Air Force Academy. He wanted to be an astronaut, didn't have good enough eyes. So he just did something else in the military or with the Air Force. So graduating from the academy, you are an officer, but the same year he graduated, he also married my mom, who already had like a 6-year-old child. And so things were tight. And then within a year, like they had me the next year. So it was, even though as an officer at that age, if you're single on your own, it's decent, but having a family of 4, it's completely different. So things were definitely tight. Like definitely growing up on Hamburger Helper for sure. I don't know if you know.
Hungry Man TV dinners. I loved Hamburger Helper, but that was rich for our blood. We ate Hungry Man and Swanson TV dinners.
We also did a lot of stuff. Well, my dad hates it, but did sauerkraut because my mom's more German. So all this. Yeah. And so my dad didn't really want to accept much help from his parents as well. So he kind of just branched on his own. He really wanted to make his own way in the world.
Can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I was curious, like, you're telling your story, like how you're telling your story from your personal observation of your family, or did you ask them about their background too? You know what I mean? Like how did you come about understanding the history of your grandfather and stuff? Is this through your own lived experience, would you say?
I would say it's just through my own life experience.
Mhm.
And I'm questions that I've maybe asked more throughout my life rather
Mhm.
than right now.
I see.
Yeah, I knew that it was more of a struggle from my mom's side of the family. And like my grandparents on my dad's side had my dad when they were like almost 40. So
Mhm.
it was just very different. And like
Mm.
practically my aunt on my dad's side raised my dad. So it was, it was just different.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. I don't really know what to say.
Yeah, no, that's and so like what was your earliest memory of using money?
My earliest memory would probably be starting like in middle school time frame. I'm not really sure when I got like a checking or savings account. I think maybe I got into a savings account when I was younger, just because I had gotten like money gifts from my grandparents for like Christmas and my birthday. Either that or my parents had a special savings account for me, and then
Mhm.
eventually they just transferred it over. Um, yeah, but in middle school, I think that's like when the age, at least I'm almost 30 now, so it may be different now, but at my at my age, that's kind of the, when you start going out with your friends more, maybe that's when you get a little bit more independence and freedom. You can like go to the movies and all. So you get some type of allowance or something, so you know how to use money or how to
Mhm.
budget. I actually was given a prepaid card in seventh grade, or maybe it was sixth grade. No, I joined varsity band in sixth grade because I had already started playing the flute earlier in elementary school.
Oh, you played the flute?
Yeah, I did. um, so we were in North Carolina at the time, and there was a band trip down here to Universal Orlando, in Orlando now. And so I was given a prepaid card that I had to, be able to budget all my money, whether it was like food and if I
Mhm.
wanted to buy anything. So that was honestly a really good experience. Because if you ran out of money, you had no more money. And it wasn't in the days like pre-smartphones. Like I didn't even have a cell phone at that point. I did get a cell phone in eighth grade, but that's because I was already playing. I was in two varsity sports at that point, and three
Mhm.
varsity sports at that point. So it was a lot. And
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
yeah, but it was still not smartphones where you could like send money. It was
Yeah,
like
yeah.
if you're in another state and you run out of money,
Yeah, you got to borrow from your buddy.
yeah.
Um, so you think I should tell about my background and then we'll go into the adult years together?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. So it's interesting, we have some parallels in our lives with sports. I played sports in high school. I played three varsity sports too. I didn't know that about you. That's cool. So was it basketball, volleyball, and softball? What were your
No.
sports?
Oh, so it was volleyball, cheerleading, and softball.
Oh, okay, okay.
I
So
did not have the basketball skills.
if you
But
could
honestly,
you
cheerleading messed up my body the most.
I was gonna ask about cheerleading because that's very, very athletic. Okay, so let me start from my childhood. So I I come from a very large Mexican family who, to be truthful, I was asking you about your lived experience because I don't really remember, like I don't really remember a whole bunch. Like my mom and dad, my dad is Irish and my mom is Mexican, and they divorced when I was really young, like two. So I spent most of my childhood years with my grandmother and my aunts, mostly with my grandmother. And my grandmother had 10 kids, 6 boys and 4 girls. And I was always ever around, I know, her poor uterus, right? And she's tiny. And my grandmother, so my mom and dad were party people, and they were both alcoholics, and my dad gambled. And when they divorced, so I would be with whoever, like whatever family member was like taking the orphan child of the family at that time, which there were many, like, and I didn't really see that as a tragedy. When you're living that experience, you don't really know, you just know that like you get to go to your grandmother's house, and I loved her so much. So but we were on welfare, and I wanted to talk about just briefly, because I was like, why is this going to be hard for me to express um, this like shame around like childhood welfare? And the reason why is because I think I got the cues from the people in my life. Like I didn't even learn Spanish, even though I probably could have been a heritage speaker and gone on to really learn the language deeply, which is important for me now. I'm just now looking back to see like what happened there. But they didn't want us to speak Spanish because they wanted us to blend into the world around us that was not, immigrant families, that were not poor families. So we spent a lot of time trying to fit in so that people wouldn't know how little money we had. It's interesting, my voice is very scratchy today because I kind of don't want to talk about this stuff.
You're doing a great job. I'm sorry to like pause you and all, but you're doing a great job. And a lot of what you're saying is actually resonating with me. And maybe we can dive into that later, but please continue. Okay. You're doing great.
Okay. Thank you for the reassurance. But I was thinking about the shame involved in like having to take off like this disguise, even right now as we're having this conversation, because now people, it's like my little kid brain is like, oh man, now people are going to know where I came from. And really, and like, I haven't really changed that much, except for that I think I have a healthier, more neutral outlook about money now. But what I was going to say is that, so we spent so much time just trying to like be like white people. That's as best I can say it. Like we didn't want to have an accent. Like I lived in Denver as a kid, and I remembered when my aunt and uncle adopted me later on, that we spent a lot of time, like I remember like there was certain Denver accent, you could tell that you were from Denver, and we didn't want that to be the case. So I didn't understand this as a little kid, but what I did understand was when my dad, when my dad wasn't drinking and he was able to take care of me, because my mom left, and so I lived with my dad or my grandmother or an aunt. But when I was with my dad at his house and he was drinking, I was probably 7 years old, I would do the grocery shopping. And I'm 54 years old, so this is obviously like a long freaking time ago. um, and it feels so long ago, mostly because we've advanced so much technology wise. And so it's like I may as well be saying I had to walk barefoot to school, although I would probably do that now as a foot nerd, in the snow for 40 miles or something. But I had this, my grandmother would have these rolly carts that were like kind of tall, like baskets, and I would take the list and the food stamps. So when I was a kid, we had food stamps that were like in a book, and it kind of looked like Monopoly money. I thought it was so fun and cool. But the cue that I would get from the grocery store, like I didn't really understand that probably kids didn't do the grocery shopping, number one, if you were 7. And number two, when I would go to the cashier and have this book of money, which in my brain was like so awesome, I didn't understand the money. So the cashier would help me pull out, because it was like Monopoly money inside of a little book. There'd be like 1s and 5s and 10s and 20s. And I think there might have been like 2 $25 bills in there, or like the welfare money. That's what I called it. I mean, I haven't talked about this in so long that I'm even talking about it in childlike terms, right? So like the first minute of shame I got was like when I could see that the cashier was concerned for me, and she would help me pull. She was so compassionate, but like she was probably like, what the hell is this kid doing buying the groceries? And then second of all, she would help me like do the math. And so then I could kind of tell like intuitively that that was not how it worked. And then I could see that the people in line behind me maybe were like watching. So little by little, I got really nervous about going to the market and doing that thing with the food stamps, even though I think it was like a really good experience. Like thinking back, I know how to do so much stuff that kids don't really know how to do. That's just from my upbringing and like what I had to do. That's like really valuable to me. And then the cool thing there was that back then, if you got change, like if you were to get dollar bills or whatever, like welfare money back, you would get it in food stamps. But if they had to break $1 down into coins, I got the freaking actual money. So I would hoard. This is my beginning of my entrepreneurship and my financial savvy, is that I would keep the change. And then I would go home. So those were the beginnings of my relationship to money that felt embarrassing. So then, and then on top of that, being in a family where I didn't have intact parents and an intact family, when I left my Mexican neighborhood, so eventually in middle school, my other aunt who lived in California, they sent me to her and her family. So she is Mexican too, and she married a man, and they had my cousin who's 9 months younger than me, and they officially adopted me. When I got there, my aunt who raised me from 7th grade on had come from the same kind of broken lineage, but she left and moved to California and made a life for herself there. And we essentially lived by the gig economy, even back then. So this is I guess by then when I moved to be with her, I was 11 or 12. I was going into the 7th grade. And that's where I first knew what an intact family was like. So my cousin and I were like, they adopted me. So we were like sisters. My aunt and uncle dealt with money in what appeared to be like a healthy way, but not like white people way. That's all I can say. Like not how like white affluent people around us in California lived, like where people were like doctors and, had like blue collar or white collar jobs. My uncle, all I can say is that we lived like gig economy. It was a cash-based economy. So, and we had lots of different like talents. So my aunt would work in the school sometimes, or we would clean. I would help her clean dental offices and stuff. And they would like have lots and lots of cash to be able to put us through school and stuff. So when we got an allowance, like you were saying, we received an allowance. And here's where I started to feel more shame, because I was so secure and I was like living in a very wonderful environment, but I didn't understand. And I don't think my parents had the tools. My parents, now I'm talking about my aunt and uncle, had the tools to themselves to really teach us, because they were young parents themselves, about like finances. So my cousin would like save her allowance, like birthdays and those times of year, holidays where you would buy gifts for other people. She kind of just knew, because of her upbringing, that you would save some of your money to buy the gifts. But when I would get the allowance, I would spend it. And nobody told me or explained to me, or if they did, it didn't sink in, because I was so happy to have like my own source of income that I would spend it on all kinds of stuff, my friends, food. And then I felt shame when it came time and I was supposed to have bought somebody a birthday present and I didn't have any money for that. So I think that is shame,
Yeah. It's hard. I'm so sorry.
Since then, we talked about this beforehand, where like, looking back, I don't think I've really talked about this with anybody except for my partner, Matthew. Because now my relationship to money is better. And I've grown so much and I have a relationship. I guess like money is supposed to be a neutral exchange, but the reason why we're talking about our upbringing and money is because it really doesn't, it's not neutral. And you have to work really hard to make it as such, right?
And that's why I was thinking it's a system of power. You're putting there is a need, and that need should be filled, and it should be filled without having to put a value on it. And I'll skip down to the bottom of what I was going to say. It's like, yes, maybe I'm just the optimist, but if everybody gave freely everything that they have, then nobody would need money, because everybody would be giving, everybody would be receiving.
Oh yeah, maybe we can.
Maybe that's just in a perfect ideal world, but you know what? It can happen.
The reason why I was even inspired, I don't think that's like so. When we get into the adult part of our lives, I'll explain about some of my role models. But you said something when we were very first kind of having our discovery call, like, you said, I don't like money. And I want to ask you more about that, like, because, and I think it has to do with what you're saying. Like, if we took um, money out as, if we took money or currency out, I understand that there's like a whole legacy of like why we needed money. Like, you can't give oranges all the time when you need shoes. And I understand that there needed to be some like accountability and whatever, but like, I want to know why you don't like money.
Oh, but even with that accountability, it's just like, oh, we could go really deep on that one.
Well, tell me why
but,
why don't you like money? That was such a visceral response from you. Like, I don't like money. Tell me.
It consumes our lives way more than it should and it needs to. And I could be doing so many other things with my life, valuable things with my time, which is a huge resource. And it's the only resource that's finite for each of us. Sorry, I kind of lost track because I was going to go on a tangent.
You could go on a tangent. Why not?
Well, my brain goes like this, and so it's hard to find a tangent exactly.
You're like, we'll end up in the kitchen or this one.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot exactly what I was saying. Yeah, so it's just like I could be doing other things with my time, but because I need money to have the essentials of food, water, and a place to live, and clothes, which how necessary are those depending on where you live? You have to meet those requirements. And I just felt like I reached a point where felt like I was in the pursuit of money more than anything else. Everybody's like, oh, I want to be in the pursuit of happiness, but I feel like they end up being in the pursuit of money, trying to be in that pursuit of happiness. And things with inflation, things just being more and more expensive, you're having to put more time in to just reach those basic needs. And it's so frustrating. It's like, if we were truly living in a community, which is what I want, we should be working together to help reach those basic needs. And even if somebody was more, we still had our roles within that community, we're still filling each other's needs. If you're having to do more doctor medical type roles throughout the day, people should be able to give what they are growing. And I think we should be able to have multiple roles within a community, especially when it comes to food. I think everybody should have some hand in the food, whether it's the growing or the harvesting or the cooking, like the production of it.
I wonder if maybe my original plan was to have you then go and tell about your adult years and what's shaped you up until this point. But I think this is a great segue into, like, maybe I'll do mine first because it speaks to what you're talking about.
Okay.
So as an adult, so eventually when I turned 18, I had a parting of ways with my aunt and uncle. We had a big falling out. It wouldn't be 13 years before I would reconcile with them. I was fully formed as a very wild child by the time I got to them in seventh grade. So at 18, when they said our way or the highway, I chose the highway and I left. By that point, it was my first year of college. I was playing college basketball and I left. I got myself a job. Well, I first got my job at an ice cream parlor. Like, my first 2 jobs ever was when I was 16 and I worked in the ice cream store. And I still was like spending all of my money on I don't know what. Like, I still had no concept and nobody was teaching me. And there was so much emotion, I think, or upbringing around like my money and like scarcity and poverty consciousness up until that point, that I didn't understand my brain, it wasn't fully developed until I was 25. So in my defense, I didn't have a clue, You were going to say something.
Oh, no. I was just breathing.
You were giving me your love and compassion.
Yes.
So when I got to college, so I parted ways with my aunt and uncle. I was a lone wolf. I mean, literally. But it was a great opportunity. And there was a lot of freedom that came with that, because living under the roof of my aunt and uncle, I knew that I had to be a certain way in order to receive their care and their protection and have my life paid for. Like, I think I was very street smart by that point, so that when I went out on my own, I was fully capable of like getting a job, and I put myself through college, and I calculated this, like, after I left, from the time I was, with the exception of what my aunt and uncle provided for me while I was in their household, I've only ever received $100 from any family member in
Wow.
any way, shape, or form, which I think is like actually something to feel proud of. Because I was like, well, is this shame serving me as I go forward? But when I was playing basketball, and we would get these per diems, like if we would go on a road trip, we would get like $8 from um, our coaches, like after we played or whatever. And so when we would stop for food, we would always have money to eat. But it's almost like we got paid $8 a basketball game. And so I would always get the cheapest thing, and then I would I would get like $4 salad or something. And then even back then I was like really eating quite wholesome. And then I would pocket the change, just like I did when I was a kid, so that I could have a little stockpile of cash. But I never saved for the future, because to me, I didn't even understand about the future. It was always like, what do I need to pay for right here and right now? Fast forward to when I met my husband. So I was always able to provide for myself. I always had jobs. I always had jobs that I really liked. I had good instincts. And I started to look at what people did around me. So I had a really great friend who I played basketball with in college, and she was the person who kind of mentored me at first. And I wasn't doing very well in school because I didn't know how to learn. And she told me, like, Rudy, that was my nickname. Rudy, just look at what the smart people do and do what they do. And so that still sticks in my brain today. Like, who do I want to emulate? And I realized that there's nobody in my family with regards to finances or anything that has to do with like alcohol use or anything in like health related. I don't look to them to emulate. For community and other aspects of tying close family relationships together, I do look to them. Why this comes back around to what you were talking about community is, when I met my husband, Matthew, who is my partner in crime and my best friend, he had really good system of money. So we figured out ways, we planned a budget, and I got myself out of credit card debt, because in college was where I got my first credit card. I would go into the quad, and they were pushing credit cards on students. So I got my first $1,000 limit credit card, which was awesome. I bought my friends drinks, I bought new clothes, and I knew intellectually they told me it wasn't like they were hiding, like, you have to pay this every month. And I was like, yeah, I can do that. Forward me the cash. And so $1,000 over the years turned into a lot of debt with like the interest rates. And I never had like high limits, because I saw you had credit card too, that you responsibly still hold. But I eventually got deeper and deeper into credit card debt that I couldn't get out of. And I always used credit, and I was always over my limit, and I was always like using resources that I didn't have. And I had one of my own my truck repossessed, that was the first time that it hit me really hard, because I really loved my truck so much. I loved it. And then to give that up consciously because I couldn't make the payments was very difficult. And then the credit card debt, we made a plan to get me out of credit card debt. And it was the first time where I felt like I wanted to have dignity around money. I wanted to be a good partner. It wasn't just me anymore. And so we did that. And then fast forward a few years later, I was trying to think, like, I don't, none of the people that other people look to for financial health, not wealth, health, resonated with me at all. Like, I didn't want to focus, like you're saying, so much on money. I didn't want to have my brain occupied with money that much. Like, there were other things in life. So I went to this 1-day cob house building workshop in Reno, Nevada, with these people called Be the Change Project. And what they were doing is, in an urban area, they were doing a natural building workshop where 70 people from all over the world, or all over the United States, came together for a weekend, and we erected this cob house, which is made of sand, just the land, like sand, straw, and clay. And we made in the backyard this structure. And these were natural builders who had had a lot of experience. But the reason why they were such important role models to me, Kristina, is because they made a commitment to live simply, and they're doing this even still today. They live on $12,000 a year, and they are a family of 4, I believe, maybe bigger now. They, in an urban setting, have their own gardens and pigs, and they raise most of their own food, and they're super involved in their community. And their idea was that this cob structure that we built would go to, like, say, a nurse, and they would have like they would have a structure that they could have, like a little house studio in that backyard, and in exchange for that, they would, like, the community, that their immediate community in urban Reno, Nevada, would receive, like, nursing care. So this is kind of what you're talking about. And it's not like you have to move. I mean, it is like this little urban eco village, and I've been following them since then, because at the time they also live without electricity in a city like environment. And they have, so this was in 2014 that I went to this workshop, and I came back and I was so inspired. And the reasons why they consciously live on $12,000 is because I think it's like a war resistance tax, or like they don't pay taxes because they make under the limit. I'm not exactly sure the details, but it's like this form of resistance. Like, if they can keep their income down to that level, then they don't have to pay into, like, the system, and they call it, I think it's like a war resistance tax. But in any case, when I came back, I was changed. And I thought, if they can do all that on that little money, like, it was a little too extreme for me how they lived, but I definitely was shaped in a new, healthy way around what it meant to, what my values were around money and dignity, like, so from shame, having the financial wherewithal to get yourself out of debt was really important, to know that I could actually do that. And then dealing with, like, a repossessed car and the shame of that, and then understanding the gift of that too. Like, suddenly I was like, well, we don't need 2 cars. We're 2 people. We don't need 2 cars. So then our relationships grew, and we carpooled together, and we, picked each other up and dropped each other off. And who needs the car then? You're forced to be in relationship. Even if it's not always easy, those ties are stronger. But so that shaped me. That experience with Be the Change Project shaped the way that I continue to relate to money now, in a neutral way and in a positive way, and not from, like, this background of shame and poverty consciousness.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for, opening up and sharing. I know sometimes it can be very difficult, especially when there are emotions all involved with it. And, I think sometimes that's why it is difficult and taboo to talk about money, is because there are emotions. And sometimes maybe that's the core of it, is emotions can be taboo to talk about as well.
That's right.
Which
I wanted to say,
great job with.
I was going to tell you, I was listening. I think this is relevant to talk about, right? So in our Foot Nerd program, Nick and Eddie have the School of Coin. So they're on a Bitcoin journey, which we'll eventually talk about in this podcast as we go forward. But it was funny because they did this podcast on Sunday, and I was listening to the podcast. Is called What is Money, Kristina? And they started to, Eddie was talking around emotions, and he kept saying about the emotions that he felt. And then Nick said, well, what do you mean? Like, what emotions? And you could see that there was just like the circling around the actual details of it, because it is hard to talk about. And if he went down that path, I think, I mean, if he actually started to describe the details of the experience of that, it would not have been easy to come back to the more intellectual ideas of like, what is money, you know? So I
Yeah.
think that is one of the reasons why this conversation that we're having is a valuable contribution. Maybe because of, you know, we're not trying to discuss, we're starting from scratch about like where we came from, you know.
Yeah, I think when you can be vulnerable and share your emotions, it also helps to resonate with people. It touches them because it's something that they probably have a
Yes.
really hard time opening up. And sometimes when you can just share that with somebody else, you know, it's almost like a dagger to somebody's heart, and not like a in a negative type of way. It's just like a piercing through the armor to like, I can open up and share about it with somebody else as well. And I think it's really important. That's
Well,
why I really appreciate you being able to, you know, be able to open up about that, your entire experience and everything you've learned from it. And it's really beautiful. So thank you.
well, Kristina, you're right. It's not easy, but I'm taking it for the team, Kristina.
But I guess I'll go ahead and talk about a little bit more my adult journey with money.
Mhm.
So yeah, I didn't have my first job until I was in my second year of college. Um, sorry, I had some good ideas that came up while you were talking, so I don't forget about them. um, well, so like I was in, you know, 3 varsity sports. I was in all APs and honor classes. You know, so I did so much that I didn't have any extra time to do any type of work, especially because family time was important, especially on weekends. Um, and then even my first year of college, my parents were, because we were in the military, they were overseas still in Belgium. So they really just wanted me to try to get acclimated and adjusted as much as possible. And then I got my first job my second year of college, and it was just like working on campus, like in one of the dorms, kind of being like a one of the desk people, just like looks and checks people in and out. It was really to have like extra money, and so my journey with money has definitely had to change a lot in the last 10 years. Being 29, so it's like, I guess my goal is really just to get married and then have kids and have a family, really. And that has definitely changed because I'm still very much single and childless, which is okay. I'm totally, totally okay.
I'm so glad you. That's so cute. Like, people don't feel sorry for me. I'm good.
Yep, pretty much. Um, so it's like just my entire idea with money has had to change because I I'm sorry, feminist women out there, but I was just like, I'm just gonna have a man take care of me. I don't really need to do anything. And so it's like really having to gain that independence and that responsibility of learning to take care of myself, and like having to um not take care of my, yeah, but fend for myself, really. So like my parents, you know, they've always like stressed savings, especially, and my dad has always wanted me to invest as well, but that has been like I've had a lot of walls up about investing, and I think it goes back to, I was like, that's just that's too much for my, not too much for my mind. It's just not something I'm interested in, and I felt like that was the man's job, and that he would have to worry about like all the future stuff, and maybe I would have something to do with like present day money, but not future day money. And I'll get to that in a little bit as well. But yeah, they always stressed savings, but I never could really save very much. I feel like maybe I had $500 in savings, maybe. But I lived very much paycheck to paycheck. So like I did go to college, but I dropped out or I just left. And I moved back home with my parents. And then I started working, or I became a licensed massage therapist. And I mean, you do make decent money, even better money than college graduates come out of college making sometimes. Um, and I was just living paycheck to paycheck, but I was living at home, so it's not like I was needing to make a certain amount of money. It was just like a lifestyle type of choice. And I did become more of like a mass type of consumer of the more I was able to have money, even like you said, like when you started to get an allowance, saving, oh, but I have money, let's spend. And just like, what's the accountability? You don't really have as much accountability when your basic needs are being met of water, food, and shelter and clothes.
Yep. You love clothes.
Well, and see, that's the funny thing is that's what I ended up spending my money on was fashion and food. I really, and still to this day, love fashion. Like I'm, it's so hard because you already know some of this. But like I love fashion so much that I wanted to study it. I looked at a few schools for fashion design and merchandising. I love it, and even like with shoes, it's a lot. But now I kind of just look at it more as an art form, and I don't really wear it myself as much, especially because if you choose not to wear the shoes that may make the outfit look the best in an artistic point of view.
Yes.
Like how I worded that. It's just, I don't want to be spending all the money on it, and I would rather have fewer items that are made well and made consciously. And so it's just kind of like I'm trying to take more of a minimalist approach in just material items that I have. And my biggest struggle, I said I wasn't going to use the word struggle, but I said it anyway, would be food.
Well, there, I mean, like, but there,
I'll just say food.
And there is like, I mean, there is okay, yes. I just want to reiterate that we have a lot in common because I come from a long line of fashionistas, and I love fashion too. I mean, and this is interesting because I wonder if this is like, not to be sexist and ageist and all the things that we said we were going to make a caveat before we started, like we're just telling our indisputable experience. We don't want to be offensive at all to anyone. That is the opposite of what we want to do. And with that being said, like it does seem like food and fashion is kind of a lady thing or a feminine thing. And I did the same thing. I spent all of my money on clothes and food and drinks, fancy cocktails. And I loved being generous. And so for the first time in my life, I was able to buy other people things. So I did that a lot,
I'm exactly
and it was
the same way.
it was so fun. And I wanted to tell you just on a fashion side note that as I become like really minimalist, I mean, this is probably what you see here, this little vase of flowers. This is like one of like maybe 3 things that are decorative in my whole apartment. And we have gotten rid of the beds, the couches, everything. Like our condo is like a playpen, and it's all for moving, and we call it modular living because we can make a standing desk, a floor desk, a dining room table. Now, granted, it's COVID times, so we don't get a lot of visitors. Otherwise, we probably would have a little more. But as I get into my really minimal fashion phase, can I just tell you what my favorite thing is right now?
Please do.
Is like martial arts cotton black pants, which you can roll up or wear like cute or no shoes, and like cotton baseball tees. And like I'm starting to have like I have 3 pairs of black pants, and then I just accessorize with a little flash of color. Like I don't know if you can see, but I put some embroidery thread on this button right here, Kristina.
Oh, that is really cute. I like it.
So, and then like I like the idea of like barefoot fashion, like jewelry. So maybe we should talk in a future podcast about making barefoot fashion fabulous.
And make it look like you're actually wearing shoes that you can go places and they not give you a problem.
Exactly.
Be nice.
Okay, sorry, I got off track, but I wanted to tell you about how much we have in
Totally
common.
okay. Well, I want to go back to the fact that you're like, so having more of that money, being a massage therapist
Mhm.
and not having to have the extra money to cover your basics. It's like I was also spending a lot of money on other people, especially going out to eat.
Mhm.
There was a quote, I don't know if you got to read it yet, that it's really resonated with me for a really long time by Mother Teresa. It's like if you can't read or read if you can't if you can't feed 100, then just feed one. And I really struggle with people going hungry, and
Mhm.
sorry, I'm even emotional about it. Like it's really heavy on my heart, and it's something
Mhm.
that's like I never want people to experience, because I don't think people should have to. Especially because even just the ability to be able to grow your own food, it's like there's no reason.
Mhm.
Um, it's
And
a
how
whole
much food and how much amazing, even like really high quality food goes to waste,
oh my
on
god,
a
and I
regular
have this
basis.
year. It's
I went to so
heartbreaking.
I live across the street from a grocery store that I shop at every other day. And one time I went late at night and there's a guy there. He is the sushi guy and he makes fresh rolls, all day, like best avocados he goes and picks. I watch this because like I see it all different hours of the day and he, making those rolls in the grocery store is a beautiful art form.
Mhm.
Um, and he does that all day long and packages these, California rolls, crunchy rolls,
Mhm.
delicious food. I went in at like maybe 10 minutes before the store was closing, and there was a guy with a garbage can next to the sushi case where the sushi maker had gone home for the day, and he was just putting all those um, extras, which were probably like I would say maybe 30 fully packaged cases, like not like I'm taking these to hungry people that need it, right? Like
Dumping it out.
tossing it like with the most. I think this is very, very hard for me to handle, like watching how people treat food because we live in a disposable society. And like even in the produce, like they're in the produce section at the end of the day, they go through and they pull the produce, but it's not even like they are packaging it up with like any type of tender, valuable, caresses. It's like a banana. I'm like, that banana, if you were hungry, would mean everything. So they just throw it. And I asked them, where is this going? And I asked one day, that same day, I asked the produce manager, where is that sushi going? And where is all this produce going? And she said, we have to throw it away by law. And I was like, this is bullshit. And she said, there's nothing that I can do about it. I want to, but you should call someone. And I'm like, who the F do I call? It's like one of those projects where there's a part of me that's like, do I take that on? Could I take that on? I don't know. Okay, that's a whole other tangent, but that is so
Oh,
upsetting, because then also it's so disrespectful too, because I go in and pay $10 at 12 o'clock p.m. for that sushi, and at the end of the night they're throwing it away, and it was made fresh that day. Pissed me off.
that's really frustrating. No, let's make a note, and we're
Yeah, yeah,
definitely
yeah.
making a podcast
Bookmark.
just about like food and food waste. And yes.
Yeah, and money.
Uh, okay.
Okay, sorry.
No, you're totally good. I'm trying to remember, where did we leave off?
You were leaving off with that you had, as an adult,
Oh,
you
generous
feel
heart. That's where
generous heart.
we
Thank
go.
you for your generous heart.
Oh, thank you. Um, oh yeah, so yeah, just being able to give and all. Like I think that's where I'm at with my money, you know, and that's where I think I've always kind of been at with my money. It's I just want to give, and I told you at one point I was like, things just kind of seem to work out with me with money. Like even though there's times where it's like I've been completely like wiped out, and yeah, I started to become financially stressed, and it consumed my thoughts and all, and I didn't like it. It's just like it kind of seemed to always come back to me. And I think it's because I always kind of kept giving. And it's the times in my life that I've stopped giving, um, that it's like then I dwindle out like out of money, and then like I stop receiving as well. And I think it's very much having if you constantly have closed fists, you don't have the ability to receive anything else. So if I constantly have open hands, I can receive just as much as I give. So that's why my concept with money. Um, yeah,
I fully resonate with that and support that 100%.
thank you.
Um, and it's funny because like I think I have to say that because there's this part of my brain that's like people are going to think we're naive or that we don't know how to, but I think we're shifting to actually addressing these ideas about um, input and output and flow and energetic states of reception, receivership, gratitude. Um, I'm not saying that we shouldn't plan for the future, because one of the things that you haven't stated yet, which I'm just going to say on your behalf, is that you're at 28 years old, you bought a house as a single female. I didn't, and so it's not just like this kind of intangible, energetic, like ideology, right? This is like about a truly embracing a mindset of how to give and receive and continue that practice, and having a good strong skill set around how to handle money. And I think that is important to recognize, that I'm really tired of people using the term woo woo. It's like, no, this is what being human is. This is what it means to have a heart and to try to be connected to the world around us. And more over the last 20 months of the pandemic, we have become increasingly isolated from each other, and that is going to amplify the, like, I don't think it doesn't, I don't get the impression that when we have to be in connection with each other in order to have an empathetic and a caring mindset. And the more that we are taken away from each other and we are scared of each other, the more that we're going to have that closed-fisted type of, I have to protect myself in a survival instinct mode, where your brain doesn't function in a caring way or a selfless way if you are in a state of fear and survival mode. And so it gives me a real strong sense of purpose and hope to know that, like, you are able to say that out loud to, like, whoever is listening to this, because I'm always too afraid to say stuff like that, so that's why I wanted to say I support that and resonate 100%.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you do. Also, I'll get back to being able to buy a house. So
Badass.
yeah. So for several years, my mom was wanting me to take Financial Peace University with Dave Ramsey. And finally, probably around 4 years ago, it's so hard to tell with COVID how long ago thing is. But I'll say around 4 years ago, I ended up going through it, and it's really made a big difference in my life. Maybe I'll go in a little bit into
Yeah,
it.
please.
It's there's like 7 baby steps that they want you to try to go through. Try to get away from using as many credit cards as possible, which I have my own feelings about, because I was able to be very responsible with my credit card. I'll go ahead and dive into that. I got my first credit card when I was probably around 23 or 24. And it only had like a $750 limit. I've never actually maxed it. And now I'm 29 years old, almost 30 years old, and I still only have a $1,900 limit. But I'm really grateful for that, because I've actually known several people that, have already in their 20s are in $5,000-$10,000 in credit card debt. And it's just, it's so hard, because maybe they get their first apartment or something and then they fill it with furniture. And it's just like, oh, we don't need that.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, but so I was able to be, financially responsible, and my credit score actually was over 800 by the time I applied for my house loan, and so that was definitely a contributing factor for sure in me being able to. But besides that, with Financial Peace, that I kind of didn't line up with everything else, it's like you start with like $1,000 in emergency savings. And then the second thing is you pay off all debt except like your mortgage, pretty much. Even like
So your
even
so-called
car.
good debt, right? Okay.
Yeah. So like even any car. So any credit card debt and your any car, any if you owe any money to anybody. And then like baby step 3 is to have like 3 to 6 months of your income in an emergency savings.
Like
In case
living
COVID
expenses.
happens.
Exactly.
And then I've never really made it past, I honestly don't remember anything past this stuff. I think some of it's like investing and saving for like college, especially if you have kids or anything, maybe saving for a house. It's really the concept. So to not use a credit card is because they want you to have the money instead of saying, oh, I'm going to have the money and then eventually I have to pay it off, but then I have to pay more for it. And it's like, if you want a new car, save up $5,000 to then buy a $5,000 car and then keep saving up more so that you can trade in that $5,000 car plus the $3,000 to, and just kind of working that way. So it's like never buying what you don't have, really. Exactly. And I think honestly, adopting more of a minimalist lifestyle has helped me with that as well.
Yeah.
Because saving is important. You know, I was able to save, and then also getting, you know, like gifts from my parents. And then I did have an investment, not that I made for myself, but that my grandpa made for me when I was younger. And then my dad managed and moved things around. So between all of those, I was able to save $67,000 that I made on a deposit towards the house. And that's helped so much because we were worried about like my debt to income ratio. And we didn't want me to have to pay too high on the mortgage because then I'd have to work more and don't like working too much. Well, because I want to do other things and I want to learn and so yeah, it's definitely been a really real blessing at the age of 28 to be able to buy a house on my own as a single female. But it's not been easy since then either. I have spent probably around $21,000 since buying the house. Completely have depleted everything. And it's been interesting, especially trying to figure out how to do things as a woman as well around the house, and feeling that I'm also in over my head with some things and projects around the house, and then having to then outsource those projects to other people that, you know, I depend on, and, you know, having to then use my hard-earned money to then spend on those things. And you want it to be, you know, good, but then also being a woman, you definitely get taken advantage of for sure. And so that's just been a real struggle. You know, I feel like if there was a man living here, maybe it's not so easy to be taken advantage of. And I don't really know how to handle it. And I don't want to be a Karen. I don't want to like.
Okay, wait, we got to stop there. Stop with this for a second, because I'm so embarrassed, but I've heard that term and I do not know what it means. What is a Karen?
I didn't know what it meant for the longest time either. And I had to like talk to like some of my clients about it.
Wait, one of my friends, we were at dinner and they were like, she's such a Karen. And I was like, like I didn't know what it meant, but I went along with it like I did. So embarrassing.
And see, I don't really like it either, because it's like sometimes you need to like stand up for yourself.
What is a Karen? What does it mean?
Oh, I'm not the best person to describe something.
Okay, no, I will look it up, and then when we have our next conversation, I'll tell you what I found out.
Okay. It's like we'll go into it. It's like someone who just kind of complains about something just for the sake of complaining about it sometimes. But then I'm like, well, sometimes it's not just for the sake of complaining. Sometimes issues need to be addressed.
Yeah, and the part about you said about like being taken advantage of, because Matthew and I, we have had a partnership for a long time, but I never like I never wanted to get married and I never wanted to have kids. It wasn't like anything really conscious. It was just like, if you're a lone wolf, you're just like a lone wolf. And I've always been a lone wolf. And then I found a friend and I was like, oh, maybe I'm a little domesticated wolf now. But I never thought about like being taken advantage of, um, or female male, until I noticed like how people, when we're, I noticed just like he's a tall guy and he's kind of a quiet, stoic guy. And so he kind of has like this authority because of his height and how he
His stature.
interacts. And he's not, he seems kind of stern, even though he's not. But like people don't, they just automatically treat him differently than they do me. And so they will, then, and they'll always like address him rather than me when talking about certain subjects. And so and that's okay. Like, I'm not saying like anything needs to be different, but I do observe that there are differences. And when he's around, um, like with, if there's a plumber or somebody who comes in, it's like they won't talk to me, they'll talk to him. Or I think it's just a natural tendency, right? Whether it's good or bad, but owning a house, dealing with like all of the things that you deal with, like we do have, we're in a learning phase, you know. I wanted to say that it's interesting because this balancing act is really good because we have chosen, we've moved around a lot where like, I'm not going to say that it wasn't like, just like with kids, like I said, well, if my biological clock starts ticking, then I'll consider having children, but it never did. And so I didn't have kids, and I have so many nieces and nephews and so many friends and family that need an extra set of hands that we were like, well, we don't need to have kids. So we didn't. And we moved around a lot and we traveled a lot. And so we never talked about, just like kids, we never had the idea to buy anything. And Matthew and I are the same. We're kind of live a nomad sort of lifestyle. Most recently, though, we decided that maybe we should explore the idea of having something that's like more permanent, a home. But because we rent an apartment in Mobile, Alabama, which is where I am now, and we're renting an apartment in Tampa, which is like my highfalutin Tampa Bala lifestyle. And we saved for that so that we could do that. But so we said, well, why don't we buy something? But I started to realize that, well, obviously it's not a good idea with like the market, especially in Florida right now. But I sound like I know what I'm talking about, but I really don't. That's coming in the future. And the second thing is that the world is changing so drastically that I was looking at this tiny little house in a neighborhood in South Tampa, and it looked so sweet. And there was like a kitchen window where the sun used to shine in, until whoever owns that house doesn't have the same environment anymore because the lot next to it has been raised. And now like there must be a 3-story huge house going in that's in the middle of being constructed, and it's under construction. And that means like if you live in that house next, and there's construction all around that neighborhood that's being gentrified. So I was thinking like, I would not want to buy money for 2 reasons. I mean, I wouldn't want to buy a house for 2 reasons. Like, the world is changing and people with money are paying cash and then tearing down the old bones of tiny houses and building these huge houses, which changes for your neighbor, the lighting, the environment changes everything. So I wouldn't be very happy if I lived in that house and this was going on all around me. I mean, I think your lifestyle would change. Do I need to change with that? I don't think we should have to do that. Like, what if you had a garden that the sun came in the backyard in just the right way for your tomatoes, and now you have, like, you're shaded by 3 stories of a house that probably won't even be inhabited for 6 months out of the year because that family will fricking be in the other world. I was thinking about that. I was like, why are we renting 2 apartments? We're not even there. Like, we meet our neighbors and then we go away for 2 months and then we're coming back. Like, that is an environment that is uninhabited, and you can't create community that way. And then not only that, like, shit decays, like things go downhill when people aren't like taking care of things. So that's one reason. The other reason is there's so, I mean, I look at you, I admire you so much for buying your house. And at the same time, I see you take these little breaths, like feeling in over your head, you know, or like if it's like with children, if I wanted to have children, I would be ready to not to dedicate my life to that, not to have 4 jobs and try to travel the world and be everything to everyone. I would be a parent. I would want to be a parent, and that's it. Like I would, that my life before I had kids would no longer be my life. I would be a parent. Same thing with a house. It's like if I buy a house, I'm going to forsake traveling. I'm going to live in that house and be a member of my community and be a member of that neighborhood so that I'm inhabiting that space and adding something, not buying something and then going somewhere else and like leaving it empty and sad. That's what
Well,
that's my tangent.
I'm kind of the same way, especially moving every 2 to 3 years. I've been here now almost 5.5 years. It's the longest
Mhm.
I've ever lived anywhere consecutively. And so it's like, I always have the internal struggle of like, oh, it would be so nice to just like have roots somewhere and be able to have like a full on garden. And then there's the part of me that's just like, I'm ready to move on, I'm ready to move on, or I'm ready to travel. But I think having the concept of, you know, if you can live in a community and you do have more of a community garden, it is so much easier for you to leave a week, 2 weeks, even a month at a time, because there's other hands on deck to help take care of
Exactly.
everything. So when you come back, it's like you can come back and then you know what, somebody else can leave, for
Yes.
a bit of time because you're working together, you're picking up the slack or,
Mhm. And to
so
come full circle back to like community, and maybe would be a good place to wrap up, is that you talk about like having like all hands on deck and like rotating and being a part of something where people are involved together. And I really feel strongly about like that. I want to be better about this, and I want to explore this more about the roots, right? Because it's not easy to stay in one place, like especially since we live in a time where like you can, well, used to be, I mean, wow, okay, we're in COVID, but like I was like, you could just go. I mean, this has been a blessing in a certain way, like talking about roots, because okay, let me just back up, because I was going to say we could travel anywhere, but that is clearly not true. um, you just going back and forth from Tampa, I will use that in as example. We wanted to explore Florida in the summer because we lived without a car. That's one of the things we gave up 14 years ago so that we could have a simpler life and live in our communities and inhabit the space that we're in. We go to the same grocery store, the same post office. We live in our community. In the summer, we rented this apartment in Tampa and we left for 3 months, knowing that we would come back. When we came back, the people in our community who live here, there were like probably, I maybe told 2 of our neighbors that we were going, that understood, people I have dinner with on a regular basis, but you don't realize that your neighbors are your people. And I had more than one neighbor come up when we got back and said, I can't believe it. We thought you moved. We were so sad and you didn't even say goodbye. And like, I want to talk about community and the heartfelt connections, because these are people that maybe we don't even love that much. They're people who kind of get on our nerves, like, oh, there goes Will. He's this, he's that. He never picks up his dog shit, but he is our people. And he was so sad because he was like, we thought you left and you moved and we were not going to see you again. And we were sad because you didn't say goodbye. And I realized, and this is not the first time, where we have a responsibility to each other. And that's all I'm going to say is like, I want to work towards that. Like, I think that there's something beautiful about being able to travel around and grow our perspective and not be narrow-minded because of how we travel. At the same time, there is a stronger pull towards cohesive community. And maybe I think like you have a very optimistic outlook and actually true possibility of creating something where people could go, where you have a cooperative or a collective type of environment. So maybe your closing words, and then we'll wrap up this episode.
um Oh, wow, you just threw that one on me.
Or whatever you want. I have a tendency to freak out and be like, okay, we got to end it.
No, it's okay. Well, first, thank you to everybody who is listening to all of this. Sorry about any of our tangents. We try to keep them short as much as possible. But obviously, you know, there is so many things that we can go down just with health. And even now, as we're really exploring more our financial health and financial literacy, hopefully this kind of gives you a good background on us and where we're coming from and how we're going to be diving into our future discussions and conversations about money and, you know, eventually soon even cryptocurrency as well, especially Bitcoin. So do you have anything you want to say, Ruth?
No, I think that was such a nice way to wrap it up.
Okay.
So thank you for joining us in the Balancing Act, our first episode, and that's a wrap.
Yeah.
I'm gonna stop recording.